Welcome to my very first online cooking demo. My name is Caitlin. I'm a holistic nutritionist and culinary nutrition expert. So this evening we're going to be making one of my all-time favorite dishes. We're going to be making some pho. And so how tonight's class is going to go is I'll do a very brief introduction of who I am, just because you might have never seen me before and be like, why is this woman telling me about pho? So I'll give you a little brief intro, and then I kind of want to share a little bit of what pho actually is. I kind of nerded out a little bit on research. I won't take more than a couple of minutes, but it's really interesting to kind of learn where it came from. And then we'll get into the actual demo part of the class. And like any sort of cooking show, I did quite a bit of it in advance, but I'll demo, how to chop the onions and how to do the ginger and the garlic and all that. But I didn't really think you needed to watch me cut onions for like 5 minutes. So I'll just give you a brief little snippet. And like Cuisine mentioned, you're able to pop your questions into the chat box, and then at the end I can come and I'll turn the camera around and we can have a little Q&A, and I can answer anything that came up throughout the demo. I won't be able to kind of pop back and forth as I'm going. I'll get into a little bit of a groove, but at the end definitely stick around and we'll answer any of those questions that came up. So I'm just going to take one quick second to look and make sure no one else has joined. All right, we had one more. Holly's joining us, and there we go. Let's get started. So my name is Caitlin Isles, like I mentioned, and I'm a holistic and culinary nutrition expert. I've been teaching cooking classes since about 2013. I taught my very first class after nutrition school, and I sort of came to nutrition in a very roundabout way. I had actually intended on becoming a English professor and had gone so far as to complete my master's degree out at the University of Saskatchewan. But when I finished that degree, I decided to take a year off. It was a little bit intense, and moved to Toronto to move in with my sister. And she has something called celiac disease, which is an autoimmune condition where your immune cells actually attack the lining of your small intestine when you eat a protein called gluten that's found in a few different grains. So I moved in with her, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't getting her contaminated or anything like that. And so I decided, you know what, I'm gonna go gluten-free and just see what happens. And so I packed up my car, moved from Saskatchewan to Toronto, moved in with my sister, and thought, hey, I'll just look for a little job in the publishing field while I apply to PhD programs. And as you might imagine, it's very, very difficult to get any sort of degree with a Master's of the Arts. I sent out tons and tons and tons of resumes and didn't really get any bites. So I had a lot of spare time on my hands when I first moved there. And in the course of like the first month or so, I just started to notice all these little shifts and changes in the way that I felt day to day. And it was something I'd never really thought about before. So I'd often struggled with anxiety and depression quite severely. I would pull out my eyebrows and my eyelashes. I had really bad digestive issues. My skin was really broken out, and I struggled with PCOS, which is a hormonal imbalance. And over the course of that month, I just sort of noticed that I wasn't pulling my eyelashes. I was feeling a lot calmer. My stomach was feeling better. And I hadn't changed anything else. All I'd done was go gluten-free. And it was this little light bulb moment that made me go, hey, food is more than, calories in, calories out, weight loss, rice cakes, low-fat dairy, running on treadmills for 30 hours a week. Food actually builds every single cell in the body. So I got really interested in nutrition and started applying to a nutrition program in Toronto, and ended up going to the Institute of Holistic Nutrition, which was amazing. I learned lots of really valuable stuff about body metabolism, body chemistry, therapeutic diets, symptomatology, all that kind of really great theoretical stuff. But there was a piece missing, and that piece was how you take a doctor, a naturopath, an allergist telling you that you can no longer eat a specific food, say gluten or dairy, and turn it into something delicious and healthy and fueling that you can make day to day to day. And so that's where the Academy of Culinary Nutrition came in. And so I ended up doing a course through that school, which is now completely online. And that's where I learned how to do these little cooking demos, create recipes for specific health conditions, menu planning, all that kind of fun stuff. And I've now taken that and turned it into cooking classes. And it's one of my favorite parts of my job. And this is now my very first sort of foray into the online cooking world. So thank you again so much for joining me. Tonight, we're going to be looking and diving into the wonderful world of pho, which has really taken North America and the world by storm, I would say. I had my first one actually when I was out in Saskatchewan doing my master's program. So I figured we'd kind of start like, what is pho? And then we'll get into the nitty gritty of how we actually make it. So this dish, it's a soup dish, if you didn't know, made with basically a broth, a rice noodle, and either beef, sometimes chicken. There's different varieties that use different sorts of meat, but the very, very basic one is broth, rice noodles, and meat. And it was actually kind of developed, they kind of assume, in the late 19th, early 20th century in northern Vietnam, in and around the capital city of Hanoi. And there's a really fabulous chef and cookbook author named Andrea Nguyen, and her website, Viet Kitch, is fantastic. I'll send you out the link to that after the call. And I got a lot of this information from her. She wrote a really beautiful history of pho. And so where they think it came from was sort of this bringing together of three different cultures that were living in Hanoi at the time. So we had the French culture, we had Chinese culture, and we had, of course, Vietnamese people all living and working together. And so they think that the basis for pho actually came from a water buffalo and broth and rice noodle soup. And when the French came, they really, really loved eating beef. And so they sort of introduced this concept of eating beef, which wasn't very common in Vietnam at the time, to the population. And then China sort of contributed all these really beautiful aromatic spices that we're going to be using and talking about in a little bit. And so the end result is this really beautiful, flavorful pho that we enjoy and that is enjoyed around the world. And there's sort of two distinct different varieties and then many, many different varieties within that. So the northern cuisine of pho is a lot more simple. So it's very basically the broth, the noodle, the beef, and the only condiments generally served with this style is lime and chili slices. The one we're likely a lot more familiar with is actually the one developed in southern Vietnam in 1954 and onwards. And that is the one where we start bringing in our fresh mint, we bring in our onions and garlic, we've got our cilantro, green onions, chilies, Thai basil, all these really awesome, beautiful herbs and things that we sort of add in as an abundant customization of our pho broth. So that's the one we're going to be making this evening. But if you like that really beautiful, really simplistic broth noodle beef, go ahead and enjoy that. It's going to be just as perfect. So without further ado, let's dive into the actual process. So when we're building any sort of broth or soup or stew, we really want to look at layering in these different flavors. So we want to start by taking every ingredient that we're adding and treating it with care and treating it with just the respect of that ingredient. So we don't need to do a ton of stuff and we don't need to make things super, super complicated when we cook. We just need to be willing to take our ingredients and turn them into something really beautiful and really flavorful with very simple and basic techniques. So we're going to talk a bit about the health benefits of pho, and there are many, many, many health benefits. It's just naturally a really health promoting and delicious food because the base of it is this beautiful, rich, delicious bone broth. And bone broth, if you followed me for any length of time, is one of my favorite foods to talk about because it's so rich in something called collagen. And collagen is a beautiful protein nutrient that we need to build healthy skin cells. It's fantastic for rebuilding digestive tract. So if you have a lot of digestive issues or you've been to a naturopath or a doctor and they've told you you have some sort of inflammatory bowel condition or anything along those lines, incorporating a really beautiful broth is a great way to give your body the nutrients and the nutrition that it needs to sort of heal and rebuild and repair itself because the body knows really what needs to be done. We just need to be giving it the proper ingredients. So starting with broth. The first thing we want to use are bones. And I looked all over for beef bones and couldn't find any. So we're going with the pho that was developed in 1939. Little piece of trivia for you. Chicken pho. And it was developed, they think, because the Vietnamese government actually prohibited the sale of, or the slaughtering of beef on Mondays and Fridays. So people turned to chickens. So the first ingredient that we need for our broth is bones. And if you are vegan or vegetarian, a really great alternative to using a bone is actually using like a dried mushroom. So a nice variety of dried mushrooms, portobello, porcini, anything you kind of go to the store and find those really flavorful, rich umami dried mushrooms, that can make a really great alternative to a bone broth. It won't have the exact same health benefits. It's still going to be really incredible for you. And that way you're not using the animal proteins if that's the way that you like to eat. So what I did with my chicken bones is I busted out my trusty cast iron pan, popped them into the pan and put them on broil. And I basically just wanted to add some color. So you can see they're kind of brown, they're a little bit charred, they're not burnt, they're not blackened, but we're just caramelizing the outside of the bone. So what that does, caramelizing, is essentially turning those sugars into, or taking the natural sugars found in a food and browning them, causing something called the Maillard reaction, which creates that sweetness, that savoriness, that earthiness in a broth or in a soup. So we start by doing that with our bones. And today I'm going to use the Instant Pot. You can very easily make this recipe in a crock pot or in a big stock pot. It'll just be slightly different cooking directions that I'll tell you about at the end. So we want to add our roasted bones and keep all the juices and stuff that come out when you roast, because that's tons of flavor, and that's actually tons of collagen as well. So that's that kind of gelatinous, if you've ever made a gravy or a bone broth and noticed that it gets kind of gelatinous or jelly at the end, that's the collagen sort of forming up and solidifying as it cools. And that's where we're getting all those really beautiful amino acids that can help with the healing of our digestive tract. It's also a really great source of minerals. So broths contain things like our wonderful magnesium, calcium, boron, phosphorus, all those trace minerals that we need in order to build strong, healthy bones. You can get really readily and in a really absorbable fashion from broth. So our next step is actually our aromatics. So you can see from my cast iron pan to the side here that I have already roasted these aromatics. So all I did was cut them up, throw them in my cast iron pan, and pop them on broil. And I took them pretty far. So I'll try to make it so you can see. They're really quite dark. A few of them pieces are even blackened. So that charred flavor, that's building that next step of flavor. So our first step was roasting off those bones. And that adds sort of that base roasted undertone flavor to the soup. The next is taking these aromatics and roasting them off and turning them nice and blackened. So what we're using for pho, the traditional, is ginger. So we've got our ginger pieces. We're using onions, so big chunks of onions, and then we used a whole bulb of garlic. And the way I prepared these veggies, I'll show you now, is quite simple. So we don't need to have fancy knife cuts or do anything like that when we're making our broth. All we want to do is focus on extracting the most flavor that we possibly can. And by chopping the vegetables, we're creating more surface area for the heat to hit so that we can brown and caramelize more of the actual vegetable. And that adds more and more flavor. So with the onion, all I do to prepare this, get a really sharp knife. If your knives aren't sharp, go and invest in this little handy dandy knife sharpener. All you do is you run it through every so often, and that keeps your knives really sharp, and it can help prevent you cutting and slicing your fingers. Hurts a lot less to cut yourself with a sharp knife, and it makes cooking a lot more fun when you're not trying to hack through something for 5 minutes. So sharp knife, and when you hold your knife, you actually want to take your thumb and your pointer finger and hold on to kind of the top of the blade here, and then wrap the rest of your fingers around the handle. And that gives you more control. So when you hold it by the handle here, the blade actually isn't quite as stable. So by stabilizing the blade with your pointer finger and thumb, you can actually get more smoother and controlled cuts. So we're just gonna cut through the bottom of the onion there. And you keep this, we would roast this, we'd throw that right into the cast iron pan. And then we cut the onion in half, just like that. And then again, to get as much surface area as we can, we take that half, so you can see, and we cut that half into half. Notice a theme. And then we cut that half into quarters. So you just end up with these little quarter chunks of onion. Nothing fancy, but again, it helps you get the surface area so that you can create that really flavorful, really delicious charred flavor. So we take those aromatics and we pop them into the Instant Pot. You want to get as much of the stuff off the bottom as you can, because again, that's where a lot of the flavor lives. And with our garlic, so this way that I prepare my garlic, this is obviously ginger. The way that I prepare my ginger for the broth is the same way that I prepare it when I make a ginger tea. And so what we're doing is we're just cutting like a little chunk. You can see, you know, it's about 1 inch, give or take. And then we want to cut it a little bit smaller. And what you're going to do is sort of place the flat end onto your cutting board. And then you have your knife, blade edge away from your body. So you don't want the blade pointing in, you want it pointing out. Take the flat part of the blade and place it on top of the ginger. And then just press your weight into the ginger. And this table isn't super solid, or I'd kind of smash down on it a little bit. And you can see it flattens the ginger piece. And what that does is it actually breaks down the cell walls within the ginger and releases a ton more flavor. So you might see recipes that call for, you know, making your ginger tea, and they say, oh yeah, just make these little slices. You're not going to extract as much flavor if you cut it into slices. You actually want to break down the cell walls where all the juice lives, and it's the same concept, the same idea for a broth, because it's kind of just like a savory tea. So we want to break down and flatten the ginger just like that. And then lastly is the garlic, and it's the exact same idea. So we don't need to peel it. We're going to leave the peels on because, again, that gives more flavor and it's less work. So you just take your garlic, break it apart, and then knife edge away, press it down, give it a little squish, and we would throw that into the cast iron pan. And you can see it's kind of flattened and little bits break off, and that's great. And you can just throw that into the cast iron just as it is. I'll try to pull out a piece. Oh, there we go. One's right on top. So you can see once it's been roasted, it's really caramelized, it's really soft. I wish I could give this to you through the internet because it smells really great, but it makes the garlic a lot less spicy and intense and makes it more mellow and sweet. And again, we're adding that extra layer of flavor. So that's what we do with the garlic, and you can see the ginger is quite browned on the edges and it's nice and soft and squishy, and same with the onion bits. So that is step 2 of making our broth. So we want to do the bones and we want to do the aromatics. So the garlic, ginger, and onions. And now if you have a big enough frying pan, cast iron pan, I didn't, you can do it all in the same pan together. I did it in 2 batches just because my frying pan is quite small. So use what you've got. It's gonna work great. There we go. So next step, we're going to start looking at some of the spices that we're using. So we used our ginger, our garlic, our onions, and that's a beautiful base flavor and also really full of nutrients. So the garlic and the onions, really high in sulfur compounds that are great for supporting our liver detoxification. So that's something that we want to eat regularly to help our body, again, just do the things that it does best. Our body knows how to detox. It knows how to eliminate waste, break down toxic byproducts, and get them out of the body. But if we can give them some of the nutrients and the cofactors that the body needs, it can do it more efficiently. So that would be our garlic and our onions. Super powered, awesome for liver health. Ginger, you probably know, fantastic for an anti-nauseant. Really good if you get a lot of stomach issues or cramping or bloating. It can be really soothing for that. And it's also got something called gingerols, which are really antibacterial and can help support our immune system. So already we've got all the benefits from the bone broth. We've got all the benefits from the garlic, ginger, and onions. We're building a super powered broth here. So next up, my favorite stuff. I call it nature's medicine cabinet. All of our beautiful herbs and spices. And I had them set up really beautifully, but I needed to use my cutting board, so now we'll have to make do. And starting off, we're going to use one of my favorite spices, which is called star anise. And I use this, let me try to find a pretty one here. You'll see where it gets its name. All right, so this is star anise. And surprise, surprise, it looks like a little star. And it comes from an evergreen tree that's native to Vietnam and China. It's got this beautiful, sweet, licoricey type flavor. It's not overpowering. It's not like biting into a big piece of black licorice or anything. It just adds this really beautiful, mellow sweetness and interesting flavor to the foods that we make. I add it to so many different things that I cook. If I'm making a chicken soup, like just a regular old chicken soup, I'll throw some star anise in there just for that extra flavor and that extra punch of nutrition. Because when I was researching this class, I learned that some of the extracts from star anise are used to make Tamiflu, which, if you know, is a treatment for the flu. And so they found that some of these components of star anise actually help our body's natural immune system and natural immune function. So I'm all for going to our medicine cabinet, our spice cabinet in the kitchen, and bringing in these foods and just eating them regularly. It's not the same as going and getting medicine from the doctor. These are more preventative and more, again, just giving your body the nutrients, the minerals, the cofactors, the vitamins, all those things that it needs to do its job best. And if we incorporate these kinds of things regularly, we're really setting ourselves up for success. We're never going to have any sort of like golden bullet that's going to keep us from getting sick, keep us young forever, make us never gain weight. That's unrealistic and impossible. But we can stack the deck in our favor by bringing in as many nutrient-dense and delicious and healing foods as we possibly can. And herbs and spices are some of the best ways to do that. So we've got our star anise. Next, one of my favorites, cinnamon sticks. So cinnamon is one of those smells that is just so comforting and so homey. And that smell, those volatile oils, actually are an antibacterial component in cinnamon. So again, it's something that can really help support our natural immune function. And cinnamon itself is really great for blood sugar management. They've done a lot of studies on cinnamon use in diabetics. And they found that eating cinnamon daily actually helps with blood sugar control. So it helps our body take the sugars that we eat out of the bloodstream and store them in our cells, our muscle tissues throughout the body. So cinnamon, again, another amazing one to incorporate into our daily diet. Next up, we've got black peppercorns, which I find are really helpful for improving the absorption and assimilation of other nutrients in the things that we eat. And a lot of supplements, if you take supplements, you might look on the container and see something called bioperine, and that's a black pepper extract. So black pepper really helps our bodies absorb and utilize the nutrients and foods that we're eating. So love using black pepper. Again, it adds that kind of mild spiciness to the foods that we're eating. And it's just kind of one of those things that we throw in everything. Next, we've got fennel. And fennel seeds, you can kind of see here, they're pretty small. But they are, again, they provide sort of a natural sweetness to the foods that we eat. And it's, again, a mildly licoricey flavor. So there's a little bit of a theme with pho. Kind of it brings in these really nice licoricey notes. And fennel is really fabulous because some of the studies that they've done on the oils, the kind of scent components of fennel, actually help increase our production of digestive juices, which isn't the most beautiful word, but nonetheless is very, very important. So if you're someone who sort of struggles with digestion, maybe you get some gassing, some bloating, just a little bit of discomfort after you eat, fennel tea, so fennel seed tea, can be a really great addition, or drinking some beautiful pho broth. Next up, cardamom pods. So these are fabulous little flavor bombs. And again, they're kind of sweet, and they're the little seed pod from a plant that is related to the ginger plant. And they are really great natural breath fresheners. And some studies have found they can help prevent ulcers in the stomach. So you might notice a theme. All of these herbs and spices and things that we're eating are really fabulous for our digestive system to help support our body's natural digestive function and to help kind of rebalance and heal any imbalances we might have. So cardamom, another beautiful option. And then the last two we have here are some cloves and nutmeg. So clove is a natural antiseptic, and again, really high in volatile oils that have antibacterial, antifungal, antiviral benefits. And nutmeg, I forgot to look up, but kind of similar ideas. And there's only a very, very small amount of nutmeg. So the measurements for this, of course, are in your handout, but we're using 4 cinnamon sticks. We're going to use 6 star anise bulbs, a tablespoon of black peppercorns, a tablespoon of fennel seeds, 1 teaspoon-ish of cardamom. I always add a little bit extra, and then like a half teaspoon of clove because it's super, super pungent. And something that wasn't in the handout that I found and wanted to add in were delicious little Thai chilies, and then these great, look at these, bay leaves. I have never seen bay leaves so beautiful. And bay leaves, again, have that antibacterial, antiseptic property, and they're just such a classic staple to add to any sort of broth. So we're going to use these. And so you can just kind of use a little handful. Follow your heart. My recipes are all kind of meant to be a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You'll adapt and adjust and make it to your tastes. But for this one, I did give you measurements so you can follow those, and then you can say, okay, I actually want more of this and less of that, or more of this and whatever. So you can go to town with that. And a little note that I wanted to mention about these herbs and spices is some of the best places to find them are independent Asian grocery stores. So if you're in St. John or Rothsay area, Freshville is where I got all of these ones. So Freshville's up on Union Street in town. And I love supporting them because they're very often locally owned and operated. They're often family businesses. They have such a beautiful wide array of herbs and spices and produce and things that maybe you wouldn't find at sort of your big box chain grocery store, which there's places for those as well. I definitely shop there. But for these beautiful sort of flavorful ingredients, I love to go to independent grocery stores. They often have a beautiful selection and you can find really cool, fun stuff. And that way you can go to websites and recipes that are really authentic and use really unique, beautiful ingredients, and you'll be able to find them there. Like yesterday I found asafoetida and methi, which are 2 ingredients in a lot of Indian cuisine that I've been hunting for. And I'm really excited to play around because you want to build, you want to get as much of that authentic flavor. And I mean, I'm never going to be as authentic as someone who's been cooking these foods their whole life, grew up with these foods. That's not really my ability, but I can try to honor them as much as possible and use as many ingredients that would be found as I possibly can. And so we can, my little sidebar, support local and expand our palates. So a couple of options on how to prepare your herbs and spices for your broth. In the handout, I said that you can get a nice big piece of cheesecloth and put all your herbs inside and tie it up really nicely into a little bundle. But if you're like me and you're lazy most of the time, I often just sort of fling them all into my Instant Pot, and then at the end, I strain it with a fine mesh strainer. So it just depends on what you want to do. There's no real kind of right or wrong. This just makes it a little bit easier on the tidying end. So I poured them all into the middle. You can see, made a little sachet of beautiful flavor. And then you would tie it off with a string. So you're kind of, like I said, this broth is kind of just like a savory tea. So we're basically making a herb and spice tea bag. And this makes it a little bit easier to get your ingredients out at the end. So we would just pop that right in. And the cinnamon sticks I don't generally put in because they're pretty easy to find. So you can just throw the 4 cinnamon sticks in, your little handful of bay leaves, throwing in your chili peppers if you want. You don't need to use chili peppers. They can be quite spicy. And that is our next step. So step 1, beautiful roasted bones. Step 2, we're roasting off, we're charring. So we're looking for that kind of blackening and darkening of the aromatics, so the onions, garlic, ginger. And then next layer of flavor, this beautiful little bundle of really aromatic, flavorful, healthful spices. So I'll just slide these out of the way. Wonderful. All right, so we're almost done building the base of our beautiful broth. And the next step is adding in some fish sauce. So I love fish sauce. I put it in so many different things that I make. It is a beautiful ingredient. It adds this really rich, funky, salty, amazing taste to the foods that you're eating. And when you open it up, you might go, oh my God, that smells really fishy. It does, it's fish sauce. But when you combine it with all these beautiful ingredients, and when you cook it off and you put it into these broths, it just creates this magic. So I really, really encourage you, if you're a little wary or unsure or whatever, just give it a try. You can get much smaller bottles than this. I just go through it like crazy. So I buy the big mega fish sauce bottles, and it says squid brand. There's no squid, it's anchovies inside, and it says even, I think, on the bottle, does not contain squids. So it's just the brand. It actually contains anchovies and a little bit of sugar, and then it's like a fermented fish sauce. It is fabulous, and your broth will not taste the same. It will be missing sort of that layer that you get when you go to restaurants if you don't use it. So that's my plea to you, to try your fish sauce if you haven't before. And it might seem like we're using a lot. We're using a whole half cup of fish sauce. And I'm measuring here for the sake of video. But when I do this on my own, I just measure with my heart. And it's one of these ingredients that you can also just add it in when you're eating your soup at the end. So you can use it as even a little bit of a condiment. And there's so many beautiful sauces, Vietnamese sauces, that have their base as like a fish sauce base. So I suggest anyone go out, buy a bottle of fish sauce, and then literally just Google fish sauce recipes, and you will find some of the most flavorful, umami rich, amazing dips and dressings and soups that you could taste. So fish sauce, everybody. Awesome. And our last ingredient, or second last, I guess, I put maple syrup in the handout, which fabulous to use. I love maple syrup. It's really readily available here in Canada, but this one is a little more often used in, I find, Vietnamese and Thai cooking and things like that. So this is actually something called coconut palm sugar. And this is one of my all-time favorite natural sweeteners. So I'll try to bring it a little close here for you and send you some of the scent through the computer. It's really rich and caramelly. So you can see it's quite a dark brown color. And it comes from the coconut palm. Surprise, surprise, coconut palm sugar comes from coconut palm. And it would be like the dehydrated sap of the coconut palm or the coconut palm flower. And it's really beautifully sweet, and it has a natural brown sugary caramelly taste to it. And one of my favorite things about coconut palm sugar is that it has a much lower glycemic load than white sugar. So it is about 50% less intense. It causes a 50% less spike in sugar in your blood sugars as a white sugar would, but it still gives you that really beautiful sweet taste that you're looking for. So I use this in a lot of baking. It's wonderful sprinkled on top of muffins with a little bit of cinnamon. You can use it, I've made really delicious caramels. So like a ginger caramel, I've used ginger juice and the coconut palm sugar and then water, and made just the most delicious caramel sauce. So really versatile, and you can find it pretty much anywhere. So you can get it at your independent grocery store, where you're getting your Asian ingredients, or Superstore and Sobeys and health food stores all carry coconut palm sugar. Superstore even has its own coconut palm sugar brand. That's how popular it's becoming. So little bit of coconut palm sugar. I'm going to try not to get one of the big lumps in. And you want, you know, just about a teaspoon or so. I got 3 lumps in, but whatever. About a teaspoon or so. And it just, what it does is it can cut some of the bitterness that we might get from some of the spices. So sometimes spices can have just an underlying bitter flavor, which is great. That's really good for digestive function. But we don't always want to taste that in our soups. So just a little sprinkling of sweetener. You don't need much, just a little tiny bit. We're not trying to make the soup sweet. We're just trying to balance the flavors. So we're balancing out some of that bitterness. And that's where we find our really beautiful use for coconut palm sugar. And then, of course, fish sauce is quite salty. So you don't need tons and tons of salt to flavor this. But I do add a little bit of sea salt or Himalayan pink salt, something like that, just to round it out. And of course, when we cook, when we actually go and eat the final product, we can adjust and adapt the actual salt levels of the broth. So we've got our layers here. We go bones, we go aromatics, we go herbs, we go fish sauce, and then we go a little bit of sweetener to create that really well-rounded, well-balanced flavor in the actual broth. Last thing we need, beautiful filtered water, and you can kind of cover everything. I think in the handout I said 8 to 10 cups. Go more, go less. I tend to make mine quite concentrated for a couple of reasons. So reason number 1 is my Instant Pot is only so big, so I can only fit so much water. Reason number 2 is when it's actually done, you don't need to have as much broth to store in the fridge because it can get to be a lot when you have like 6 liters of broth that you have to take care of. So what I do is I make a really concentrated batch, and then when I'm ready to eat it, I dilute it to however flavorful I want it to be. So water's in, everything's all ready to go. We take our lid on our Instant Pot. If you are using a saucepan, or a stock pot, sorry, you just throw everything in. Lid on the stock pot, turn it up to boil, let it boil for a minute, and then turn it down, and you're just gonna simmer it really low for a really long time. So these flavors take time to develop. They need a little bit of love, they need a little bit of patience, and so letting them go for a little bit of time, little bit, about 8 hours, is what you want if you're using your stock pot. So if you find the water really starts to evaporate off, just keep adding more water as needed. Same with a slow cooker. So you would just add everything to your slow cooker, fill it up with water, put the lid on, and put it on low for, again, 8 to 10 hours, just to extract that flavor. Same idea. If you find it's kind of boiling down, just add a little bit of extra water. The Instant Pot is gonna save you about 7 hours. So what it is it's a little pressure cooker. And it's not like the pressure cookers from the 70s where everyone was afraid they put it on the stove and it would blow up and burn your face off. This one has so many safety mechanisms built into place. It's virtually impossible for you to use it if something's not functioning correctly. It just will turn off on you. So when we've got our Instant Pot, we take this little vent in the back. You might not be able to see it. I don't have a cameraman, but it says either venting or sealing. So you're gonna push this little knob back to sealing. And then I'm gonna turn it towards me a little bit. And I use 2 buttons on my Instant Pot. Saute, which we don't need to use today, and manual. So we're gonna hit it to manual. And oh, look at that. I already had it programmed for 60 minutes. So what happens with an Instant Pot is we don't need to cook things as long. Letting you know it's here. You don't need to cook things as long because it's so highly pressurized. I think this is like 12 PSI, so 12 pounds per square inch. And so you are basically jamming the flavor into your broth in a fraction of the time. So you can do 60 minutes, you could do up to 90 or even 120 minutes. What I'll often do is I'll put it on that high pressure for 60 minutes. So what it does, it kind of turns on automatically and it will say on. And then it builds up pressure. And there's a little metal kind of spigot here. And when that's pushed up to the top, this will then start counting down your 60 minutes. And so you can leave it be. You can put it on in the morning, go to work, come home, and it's gonna be fine. Because once the pressurizing is done, once it's pressure cooked, it starts to naturally release the pressure through this back vent. So you can either manually release the pressure by pushing it forward. If say you're like, I really want to eat my broth like right now, you just manually release it. All kinds of steam will come out of the top, and then you can take the lid off, strain out your broth. But say you're going out and you're like, oh, you know what? I don't care. It can kind of do its thing. You can let it naturally release, and it will just go to sort of a keep warm setting. So you can leave it on overnight. So say you put it on before you go to bed, it'll pressurize it, really get that high intense flavor, and then it'll kind of just keep it warm in the morning. That's what I did with the broth that I made. So of course I'm not going to make you hang out for like 2 hours while this does its thing. I made a version yesterday. So you can see how dark and rich this broth is. So this is super, super concentrated. This is a really concentrated, really flavorful broth. And so what I would do is, if I'm making my pho, I would use, maybe half this jar, and then use the same amount of water, and just adjust adding a little bit of salt just to bring out those flavors a little bit. And then you're going to make your broth go further. You're not going to have to store as much, and it will give you that really delicate flavor. So you don't need it to be, you might want it to be. Sometimes I like a super potent broth, but sometimes you want it to be a little more mellow, a little chill. So then you can dilute it down with some water, and that's going to kind of let you figure out what you want your broth to be on a day-to-day basis. So I find eating pho is just so wonderful if you're not feeling well, maybe you're a little hungover, maybe you're just needing that little bit of a hug on the inside. Making pho for supper, which I get to have after this demo, is just a beautiful way to kind of take your time to explore these new ingredients and to make a food that's really exciting and so healthy. And you don't need to, I say, oh, a healthy pho. Most pho is really healthy just by nature of the fact of the ingredients that you're going to find in a pho. Maybe the box cartons that you get at the grocery store, not quite as much. But, when you go to a lot of these restaurants, they're making them from bones. They're using these amazing cuts of meat. They're making their soup with a lot of love and a lot of heart. And we can do that at home. So that's how you actually make the broth. And, then you have your broth ready to go. The next step is to build your amazing little bowl of pho. Oops. So I've prepared a few things here. I like to eat it in a big giant bowl because I like to eat almost everything out of a big giant bowl. Makes it so it's nice and easy to kind of stir everything together. You don't have to worry about splashing it everywhere. So for mine this evening, I made beautiful rice noodles. And rice noodles, if you're grain-free, you can use like black bean noodles or sweet potato vermicelli as well, work really nicely. Pho actually is a celebration of rice noodles. So if you can eat rice, I would say go for it. I cooked these already, and you just plop them right into the bowl. I'm very excited to eat them. So that's your base. You're going to have your base of noodle. And then what I did for vegetables, because you've often noticed if you've gone for pho, it's not a vegetable-rich food, and it doesn't need them. There's enough nutrition in here. You're getting a lot of minerals and vitamins. You don't really need to fill it up with veggies. But what I really like to do, because we strain out the onions and garlic, is sort of fry up my own onions and garlic. So all I do is I slice an onion, caramelize it with a little bit of olive oil or avocado oil. I think I used duck fat today just because I had some left over, and chopped up garlic into little pieces. So just little chunks like that, fried it all together, and then add that into your soup. So you can put that right on top. And I'm not going to add my broth because it's unheated and I haven't diluted it yet. But the next thing I would add would be beautiful, amazing fresh mint. So mint is traditionally used in a lot of the southern Vietnam pho, and it is one of my favorite herbs. I drink piles of mint tea every single day, and fresh mint is just absolutely gorgeous. You can bruise it between your fingers and I find it just instantly lifts your mood, and it's really fabulous, coming back to that theme, for digestive support. Mint extract has been used in studies for people with IBS symptoms, so a lot of that stomach cramping and pain and discomfort, and they found peppermint and mint oil can be really helpful for alleviating a lot of that digestive discomfort and calming down some of those spasms in the digestive tract. So I always put just a pile of fresh mint in my bowl of pho. Green onions are another one of my favorites, and so I like to just chop, a little handful. The more the merrier, really. And like regular onions and garlic, they're part of what's called the allium family, and that means they're really high and rich in that sulfur compound I mentioned. That's good for the liver, and they just add a light bit of freshness and flavor to the broth. So we're going to add some of that. And what I sometimes do with kind of this end of the green onion is I slice down like this, and then you don't end up with big, huge like chunks of the white bit, but don't throw this away. This is like the most flavorful, delicious part of the green onion, and it breaks my heart when I see it not being eaten. So cut all the way down, right to the root. And so you can see I kind of cut it like that, and now we got little chunks. So we'll add some of that to our soup. And it looks like I forgot my shaved beef, but what I like to do is cut really thin slices of beef, and what I do is I actually freeze the beef. So you can just buy like a sirloin steak or a tenderloin, whatever your budget allows, and just cut it into sort of really thin strips, almost paper thin. Like you want them really thinly sliced because we're putting them into the pho raw. And the super, super hot broth actually cooks the beef in the soup. And so it infuses those beef strips with the pho flavor. Another great option that I mentioned in the handout, I know I keep gesturing over here, it's because that's where my laptop is and the recipe's on there. But my screen is black, so it doesn't really help. But another option is adding in, so vegetarian option, mushrooms make an amazing addition to a pho. A vegetarian sort of like, not a protein because they're not protein food, but they give that same texture and that umami and that delicious flavor. So you can thinly slice portobellos, you can thinly slice crimini mushrooms, porcini, whatever you got, chop them up, and again, you can put them into your pho. Something I mentioned in the handout is I will sometimes actually cook a whole chicken instead of just using, so today I used chicken backs. I'll actually put an entire chicken into the Instant Pot, which is how I made this guy yesterday. I put the whole chicken in there, and then for when I'm adding meat to my pho, I just sear off a little bit of that already cooked chicken and throw it in, and it's really, really flavorful and amazing. And then a last option that I really like is little sausage balls. So you can kind of pick your favorite sausage, deer, moose, chicken, pork, whatever it is. I think there's some really good vegan sausages out there as well. So you can roll those into little balls, and when you're heating up your broth, throw the little sausage balls in with the broth, and that allows them to cook. And then you would just pour it over all of these ingredients. Traditionally, a lot of pho will actually have offcuts, so offal is what it's called, so there might be tripe. You'll get sometimes oxtail and those different kind of braised, delicious bits of beef. So go wild, go online, go to the site that I send you, Andrea Guen, and she has lots of different variations of pho and different things you can add. So those are some options there. And finally, our last thing, which is a very polarizing ingredient, and not everybody loves it, but I do, is cilantro. And I wanted to keep it like this to give you a little storage tip. So cilantro, beautiful, fresh, green herb, and it often comes in gigantic bunches. And most people who come to my classes are like, hey, Caitlin, I buy cilantro and I use a handful and then it goes brown and squishy in my fridge. So to keep that from happening, ta-da, we actually treat it like a flower. So I don't recommend using tons and tons of plastic, but every so often I'll pick up a little veggie produce bag because it helps keep my green herbs really fresh and really delicious in the fridge. So you want a beautiful, or not a beautiful, you want a little plastic bag, general plastic bag. And when you get your cilantro, or this works for basil, it works for the green onions, it works for mint, parsley is another really fabulous one. I often do this with kale. So when you get it home, you actually cut the bottom. So just like when you get flowers from the florist and you trim the bottoms before putting them in your vase, you do the same with your green herbs. So you just trim the bottom off, and then my beautiful sunflower seed butter, they don't recycle last year, so I keep them for these sorts of purposes. You add some water. So I filled the water to about here, and then put them in like a little beautiful cilantro-y bouquet. And that can stay on the counter for a couple days, but when it's a huge batch like this, I put it in the fridge because I know I'm not going to probably eat a pile of cilantro this large in like 2 days. So pop it in the fridge with the little bag on top. So you saw the little bag, kind of just nestle everything in like so, maybe a little bit neater. And then I keep it, because I have a small fridge, I keep it in the door, or you can put it on your top shelf. And this is going to make it last so much longer. It is one of the biggest game changers that I ever discovered when it came to food storage. So, little tip on how to store your fresh greens. And we're going to use a little bit of cilantro here. I say a little bit, but I really love cilantro, so I'm going to use a nice little chunk. And I just cut a little bit like that. And when I add it to my pho, I don't like chop it super finely or anything. I like to keep kind of big pieces to chew on. And cilantro I love to use because, I mean, all green herbs and green foods are just good for you by virtue of the chlorophyll, the magnesium, the nutrients that they contain. But I really like cilantro because it has been shown to be a heavy metal chelator. So heavy metals accumulate in the body, and it can be a little difficult for us to get them out once they've been inhaled or whatever, eaten, however they may end up there. But cilantro has been shown to help pull it and chelate it from the body, and then we just sort of pee it out. No big deal. So incorporating cilantro into the diet regularly can just, again, help support your body's natural detoxification processes. So I chop a little bit of cilantro up and I throw it in. Another addition that I love, last one, is Thai basil. I searched like 3 grocery stores and they're just out at the moment, but if you can find Thai basil, it's beautiful. It's, again, has that slight licoricey flavor that really goes nicely with the rich depth that we've developed in our broth. And what these nice, bright, fresh herbs do is like really lift this rich, earthy, spicy sort of base broth into something fresh and light and amazing. Limes too, can't go wrong with limes. A little tip if you want to kind of shift the flavor is I cut it in half and then I'll actually pop that into the broiler on the cast iron. So cut side up, and just for a couple minutes it'll start to kind of blacken a little bit, and then you squeeze it in. And it just, again, it adds an extra layer of flavor that you don't get from just kind of popping it in. I mean, I don't do it every time because sometimes I don't want to turn on the oven. But if you can do a couple of them at a time and then pop them in the fridge and use them to flavor your pho. So I think that's everything. You can see here, look at that big, beautiful bowl of green goodness. And because I added the Thai chilies right into the broth, I'm not flavoring with any hot sauce or anything, but you can add chili oils and sriracha, whatever you sort of like to bring it up to that spice level. But we get this beautiful, amazing, herbaceous, noodly, beefy, chickeny, whatever goodness to slurp up on a cool kind of, well, I guess June evening here in New Brunswick. It's a little chilly. But I'm going to take this off now and start answering some of your questions. We'll see how that looks, if we're able to see my face or not. But thank you so much. I hope you've stuck around. And this is recorded, so I will send it out to you probably tomorrow. Thank you. All right, let's see here. Okay, from Joni, we've got a question. Where do I typically get my beef bones? So I get my beef bones from a local market called Cochrane's, and they work with a lot of Atlantic Canadian suppliers. But often if you go to the grocery store and just ask at the meat counter, they will often have lots of beef bones and soup bones in stock, because they're breaking down whole animals or half animals, quarter animals, whatever they're getting. So they're going to have a lot of those bones, but they're just not something that a lot of people go to the Atlantic Superstore and are like, oh yes, I would like 5 pounds of bones. But if you go to the counter and ask, you're often able to get some bones from there. Health food stores, if they have like a refrigerator or freezer section, will often carry bones as well. Is a nice place to check. If you are in the Rothsay St. John area, I go to Cochrane's. So they have chicken backs and they have beef bones. So the beef bones are generally in the freezer and the chicken bones are in the cooler. And they might even have bison and other things as well. You can do this with so many different things, like trying lamb or something like that. All right, so question 1. Let's see what we got any more here. So the fish sauce, is that what you're asking, Chris-Ann? Where to find the fish sauce? Just pop it in the chat. So fish sauce. The fish sauce I just got right from the superstore. A lot of them will have international food aisles, and so you can find them in that section. If they have a section even with Thai foods or Chinese foods or things like that, there'll often be a small bottle of fish sauce there. So most grocery stores will carry a fish sauce. The big giant squid one that I got came right from the superstore. So that's where I picked that one up. So just give a call and ask, and then that way, right now, you don't have to kind of wander around too much. But generally, most grocery stores are going to carry a fish sauce. And there's a couple brands too. So Blue Dragon is another brand right off the top of my head that I've used in the past. That's really good. I can't remember the other ones, but a lot of, and the independent Asian grocery stores always have a super wide selection of fish sauces as well. So you can look for those in those grocery stores. So you can go there, get your herbs, your spices. You can get basically everything. I got everything but the mint at Freshville yesterday or Friday or whatever day it was. And they had everything I needed. Noodles, they had nice, beautiful herbs, limes, all that good stuff. So yeah, check that out as well. If you have one in your hometown, they would likely carry the fish sauce. All right, let's see if we've got any more. Okay. Do you freeze the broth? And if so, how long does it last? And then for Nancy, how do I reheat? So once it's frozen, how do I reheat? Okay, so if I freeze my broth, which I often do, I will keep it in the freezer for, up to 6 months. When you freeze your broth, so see how this bad boy's filled right up to the top here? If I'm freezing something, I'm only going to fill it to about there, because when the liquid freezes, it actually expands and it can crack the jar, and then you can't eat the broth because there's a chance there's glass in it. So keep it in the freezer about 6 months or so, leaving about 1 inch at the top for expansion. And then to reheat it, what I do, Nancy, is I take it out. I try to remember in the morning to take it out, and I put it in my sink, and I put this jar into a bowl with not hot, but kind of more like tepid water, because if you take something frozen and put it right into hot water, it's going to crack. So I'll just put it into like a little bowl of tepid water and let it thaw enough so that I can dump it out. You might still have a bit of frozen broth in the middle, and then you would just put it on the stove, turn it up to like a high heat, bring it to a boil, and you can let it simmer for a minute or two, taste it, see if maybe you need to add some more seasoning or anything like that, and then pour it right over your broth or over your noodles. So yeah, it lasts quite a while in the freezer. If you can, try to write the date and what it is on a piece of masking tape and then put it in the fridge, because sometimes I know I did this the other day. I found a bunch of soups and I had no idea what they were, and I didn't know when they were put there. So I try to put the masking tape with just the date and what it is. So you can just say June 1st, pho broth, and then it's in the freezer, and then you'll know, oh yeah, that's what that was, and I should probably eat that soon. So a little tip, masking tape and a permanent marker. All right. So the complete pho with all, okay. So Nancy's next question, can the complete pho with all the herbs and everything be frozen? I don't generally freeze it with the herbs, just because they don't really thaw very nicely. And with the herbs, we're adding them in at the end when everything's already done. What you can do is make your broth, make your noodles, and fry up those onions and garlic if you're adding that, and kind of put the noodles at the bottom, onions, or put the, noodles, onions, broth, freeze that, and then thaw and use that. Your noodles might get a little gooey, so if you were doing that, I wouldn't cook them fully the first time. And then you can reheat that and throw the herbs in. That being said, if you do want to chop up the herbs and put them in frozen, you can. They just won't be quite as fresh when you eat them, but it's still going to be delicious. It's still going to be really good. So if that's going to get you eating the whole thing more often, go for it. Because if you've got this whole thing and you're making batches and you just can freeze a few of them, it will still taste fabulous. It just won't have quite the same freshness as if you were just throwing in the herbs at the last minute. But yeah, you can do that. All right. You're welcome. Okay, any other questions? I don't see any in the chat. Remember, if you are asking a question, to hit everybody. Okay. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, I am going to sign off for the evening. Thank you again so much for joining my very first cooking demo. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day, showing up, asking awesome questions, being engaged, and just kind of supporting me and doing what I love to do, talk about food and eat food. I will send out the recording so then you can watch it or share it with friends or whatever you want to do. And I'll send a link to Andrea Nguyen's website. I really nerded out on it. There's so much cool information there. She's got a fabulous cookbook. So if you're interested in Vietnamese flavors and Vietnamese cuisine, she is a great person to go to. And of course, you can always, if you have other questions that weren't asked in the call, pop me an email. Just reply to one of the emails that I sent you and be like, hey, Caitlin, I had this question I forgot about, and I'll get back to you. So again, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I will see you again sometime soon. Thanks.